All right, so we're going to begin the glossary, which is really in a way, it's a summary of the book with the key concepts presented in alphabetical order. So it may be that this is a useful way of, in a way, as I say, summarizing the whole book through the main ideas that are described briefly in alphabetical order in the book. Okay. Eros effect. Eros effect. This term is used by the sociologist George Katsiafikis to describe the intense communally binding experience that can happen in the rising moment of a potentially revolutionary social movement. This is the Eros effect. Katsiafikis emphasizes that over and above any objective reason that a revolutionary group may come together, there is an ever-present invisible energy that may also emerge from the group's social relations with immense unifying and transformative potential. And just pause that for a minute. So, for example, here is George Katsiafikis's description in a paper that he wrote called The Eros Effect of what happened in the 1960s in Paris, France. He said, in this situation, this is May 68, I think he's talking about, in which this huge rebellion happened in France that was actually a worldwide phenomenon of a movement rising up that happened to occur at a certain moment in French history in Paris in what became known as May 68, the historical month where what he describes here happened. In this situation, George wrote, Katsiafikis wrote, in this situation, an intuitive process of identification occurred in which individual and group self-interest were transcended as the universalized interest of the species emerged. It was not only the case that a new norm was created. Within a matter of 9 days, the entire value system and institutions of France were transformed in the everyday lives of millions of people. Patriotic nationalism was swept aside by internationalism, and as self-managed factories, universities, and cities suddenly appeared, France was suddenly on the brink of revolution. How do we explain this sudden transformation of the whole society? Well, the concept he uses in his paper was the Eros effect. But in this book, I call it the spiritualization of public space, in which what had previously been flattened out suddenly, through the process of social movement, emerged into visibility, and people suddenly saw one another fully, sometimes for the first time, with a tremendous experience of joy, excitement, and mutual recognition. And that experience of rising mutual recognition of each other's true humanity is what I, in this book, in a way, link to what George was talking about as the Eros effect of social movements, the binding effect of the movement itself.
As an epilogue to that fairly abrupt ending of that earlier recording of mine on the Eros effect, let me just add or conclude with this point that in the book I described this phenomenon that occurred in the 60s, but it's occurred throughout history when there are upward spirals of the type that I talk about as the effect of social movements, evolutions of consciousness that go upward in a spiral. There's a ricochet of mutual recognition that spreads from, in let's say the 60s, it spread rapidly from Berkeley to Prague to Mexico City to New York to all over the place. suddenly everybody came out, you might say. And the erotic aspect of this, the Eros dimension, is the longing to connect, the longing for human connection realizing itself. And the reason that there is an Eros effect, the reason that there is a ricochet of this kind, is that everyone is secretly waiting for it unconsciously, so that the entire system of the false self is a constraint that is created by fear of the other and our conditioning to be the various roles that we're performing within the system, but that underneath that there is a powerful longing to see and be seen, to enter into each other's presence, which is a spiritual elevation of the soul that's deep within us. And what happens in these moments, these historical moments of spiral, is that this becomes touched upon by enough people, one to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other. Sometimes millions at once can happen through a mass event, like a little bit like the murder of George Floyd in part provoked that part of it. But the essential point is that we are ready. We are ready to come out spontaneously if we are offered the opportunity. And we are never offered the opportunity so long as we are, you could say, traipsing through the roles of life. Year after year, everything's okay, fine, but actually suppressed. And then when the opportunity arises to connect with the other, to really enter the other's presence and go have that upward movement toward the other, that joyful movement, it comes out spontaneously. You don't have to try. Some people stop it, do everything they can to stop it, but you really don't have to try, because out it comes. If the idea of the social movement is difficult to wrap your mind around right now, think of what happens in natural disasters, where people leap to each other's aid and they have the greatest experience of their lives. Sometimes traumatic, but sometimes absolutely wonderful or beautiful. And I've described before the San Francisco earthquake in 1989, when people suddenly were having dinner together by candlelight who never spoke to each other because all the electricity was off. The system was off. And on came the human. So the Eros effect is a spontaneous emergence of a loving impulse toward other human beings, reciprocated by those human beings, allowing it to come out in ourselves. Okay.